Welcome to the Living Consciously TV show. We are coming to you live from our Denver, Colorado studios. I'm your host and moderator, Coach Steve Toth, and our theme today is, what universe are you living in? Let me introduce you to our spirituality cast members. First is Jane Eileen Cohen. She's coming from us, to us, and from us, from San Diego. We're all connected, aren't we?
Nice to be here.
Welcome. And also Jim Gillette. He's also our spirituality cast member, and he's coming to us from San Antonio, Texas. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. Glad to be here.
Great. And Helen Carrison. She's coming to us from our European studios and headquarters from Brussels. Welcome to the show, Helen.
Thanks, Steve. Great to be with you.
Awesome. And also Nina de Rosa. She's coming to us from Las Vegas, Nevada. Welcome to the show, Nina. And she's also our spirituality cast member, at least for today.
Let's hope I can come up to the podium with this, but it's great to be with you.
Fantastic. Thank you. So we're going to have two segments, as usual. First segment, we're going to have a dialogue about what are the issues and problems with not recognizing in terms of where we are living in the universe in any moment. And then in the second segment, we'll have a dialogue about some of the tools and maybe some of the modalities that our cast members have used either for themselves or for their clients to help them bridge these different universes that we seem to be coming from. So today is a very interesting show. We attempt to have one of these every month, and we call them a pillar show. And today's pillar show is about spirituality. We have 7 areas of life, which is the foundation of our show, and one of them happens to be spirituality. And who took leadership today is Jane Eileen Cohen. And I would like her to explain a little bit about what are these spirituality shows or pillar shows about, and say a little bit more about the theme.
Yeah, the theme. I know it's sort of an unusual theme. Well, I wasn't really prepared to explain about spirituality. What do you want to know about it?
You mean the spirituality pillar?
Subject.
Okay, well, simply is what's different about this show than all the other shows that we do is, first of all, what is probably fairly noticeable is that we don't have a guest cast. So we don't have somebody from the outside that's being with us. We are doing this within the cast team, and we are attempting to go a little bit deeper in a specific subject matter. Today it's going to be about spirituality than normally we have time to do when we have a guest cast member with us. So really what the show is about today is to go as deep as we can to have our viewers get something that they get inspired about.
Okay. So the theme for today actually came from an epiphany that I had in response to the cast had a meeting, and I referred to it in a previous show in which there was an emotional trigger that happened between Steve and myself. By that I mean something emotionally came up that sort of was jarring and sort of gets you off of. For those who don't understand what emotional trigger means, it's hard to explain what it means if you haven't experienced it. It means when you get upset sort of beyond the actual reality situation. Anyway, something happened in that meeting that led to an epiphany for me, and that led to this theme. So I thought I would explain more specifically what happened, because I think it'll allow people to understand what I'm talking about.
Great.
Does that seem okay with you? Okay.
Yeah.
So we were in this meeting, and Steve had just had a visioning session with somebody about the direction forward for the show. And so he was sort of sharing that with everybody. And in the course of saying that, he said that he was going to, we were going to be interviewing CEOs from around the Denver area. And that jarred me, because I know that our premise has always been that we are not interviewing guests, they are part of the panel. And so I asked him to repeat it, and I just couldn't quite grasp Like, is he changing the whole format, or what is he doing? And he isn't even saying he's doing that. So I asked him, I said to him, I thought we don't interview guests. And so Steve said, why are you crucifying me for using the wrong word? So at that point, we were clearly having a separation of universes. I was in one universe and he was in another universe. And then it triggered in me the feeling as though he doesn't want me to get clarity. He doesn't want me to ask questions to find out what actually is true. And so he's attacking me for asking what is true. So that's the universe that I was in. And we sort of went back and forth being emotionally triggered, and we didn't really get to a resolution in that meeting. So I was pondering this for close to a week after that, because I just couldn't make sense of what occurred. I'm getting all nervous right now. So anyway, and then all of a sudden I was sitting there thinking, well, Steve said, you're crucifying me for using the wrong word. Could he actually mean that he really thought that I was attacking him for using the wrong word? I mean, that is specifically what he said, but it didn't occur to me that he actually meant that. Because to me, that was so outside of my reality concept of where I was. I had no intention of attacking him about a word. I just wanted to understand what he meant. And that, it really, the epiphany was, oh my God, somebody could be in such a completely different universe as me and believe that to be reality. And here I am. So he thinks that I know what he means, and I'm just attacking him for using the wrong word. And it just blew my mind, completely blew my mind that we could be in such different universes. And then when we had our next meeting, I asked him if that's what he actually meant, and it was. So anyway, that's where this comes from.
So you needed clarification on one particular word he said. And it's amazing how one word can make a completely different conversation, just that one word, which is what happened to you. And he didn't even mean that word.
Right.
Which was very strange, because I think a lot of us took it as, okay, well, he really means this, but you didn't. You said, well, that's what he said. That's what he means. Now I don't understand. So it's amazing in our language how we say something and we misrepresent it by one word.
Yeah, so...
Yeah, and I think it's the emotional, once again, that trigger idea, it's the emotional charge that we attach within the patterns of our life. The language or words or whatever, an action is what's on the outside, but what's happening that separates us is the energy charge that we give to elements that we interpret. Now, we're all interpreting within that reality that we've created and we see, but when we respond strongly, there's an energy charge, and that's the trigger. That's why it's called a trigger. I mean, it's like a big reaction to something that may not be understood by anybody other than ourselves. Right. So that's a great example, I think. I mean, it's like a real-world example. But I know for myself, as I was listening to you, Jane, I have stuff like that happen all the time. I have a feeling that all humans do. You know, it's like a quick response to something that we interpreted one way, and maybe the other person didn't even know they were getting involved in a drama, you know. So
I think this is as much to do with listening, actually. I think this has a lot to do with being able to listen. And, you know, as Stephen Covey said, to be able to listen, to respond, to understand, rather than respond directly. So we listen, and we listen at a level where we are actively understanding the person, rather than just hearing something like you were saying and like you were explaining, Jane, hearing a word and that immediately has a reaction and we respond to that word immediately. So if we take more time, I know I've had many situations in the past where I've actually listened to respond or react rather than to understand.
I think sometimes we're a little afraid to sort of ask a question if somebody has said something and you don't quite understand it, and you're kind of thinking, well, I shouldn't really, it's rude to interrupt. Well, it's not rude to interrupt if you catch it in the bud and you try to find out immediately what exactly did they mean. Did they mean this or did they mean that? So if it kind of doesn't jar with the conversation, jump in and don't be afraid afraid. I think for our audience out there, don't be afraid to correct it at that moment.
I think it's all about actually just understanding yourself and your response to that person. Yes. I think sometimes, yes, it's good to jump in, but other times it's actually good just to take a little bit of distance and say, okay, well, that's interesting. You know, I'm feeling something around this word, and it was, or the phrase or whatever. And actually take a little bit of time with yourself and your own energy around it, because then you give yourself a full chance to understand what the other person was actually, and then you bring it up. But it's important to bring it up, because otherwise it just stays that sort of, but elephant in the room.
I agree with you, though. I agree with you to sort of sit back and wait a little bit, to just listen to the rest, or sort of, so that you understand a little bit more than jumping in. And I agree with that, actually.
Okay, so I feel like we're on a runaway train here. I think I'm the other party that was involved in this. And
Steve,
I feel that I have something.
Off the runaway train, Steve.
I feel that I have something to say.
Triggering again.
And what I have to say is, how much of this has to do with the tone of voice that we use?
A lot.
Like say something more about that.
Well, I would say it's the interpretation of the tone of voice. It's always the interaction. I know that there's probably things that set me off that it was set off, not big, but I just have a little bit more of a reaction because of my interpretation. I'm really trying to keep this. I can talk about the larger view, and I think we'll get around to that. But I'm thinking about this from my viewpoint, and how I try to take a few moments. I try to be soft, I try to be gentle and listen, but it always gets away. So the tone of voice that I can handle just fine, maybe somebody even screaming and I'm just fine, it may be very different for the next person. I think each one of us has a complex of response possibilities based on our own emotional sensitivity.
Yeah, I think so too.
Okay,
yeah, I think, a tone of voice, if you really relate it to children, when you're bringing children up, and this is a good thing to relate it with, because your tone of voice actually directs them whether you mean it this way, or this way. So I think it's a good example with our younger generation, especially the little ones that are sort of learning, and we're trying to help them, and sometimes we put a voice out there that's really harsh, and they jump, and you really want their attention. So I think that's where the sort of the training comes in, when the parent or whomever is talking to this child to get attention or to ask the child to get to the correct way. So that's where a lot of tone of voice comes into, is when we're training or when we're teaching our younger generation.
Well, I think what we're dealing with here, there's two ways to look at it, you could say. One, when we're talking about tone of voice, we're talking about how do we not trigger the other person. So then we have to know, where does this person have a sensitivity, so that I don't trigger that sensitivity, because that's where there's the likelihood of the person getting triggered or not.
I'm not sure, Jane. I'm the way I experience it is that actually it's not about trying to double guess how the other person might interpret you. It's about making really sure that you're giving the message you intend to give. Because you're the only person who's responsible for your message.
Well, so the thing is, I'm trying to say is, I don't really think it's about an issue. I mean, there's two sides. So there's one, if you want to try to be really careful about your tone of voice so you don't trigger somebody, and then you might know that there's certain areas in which you're triggered. So if it's an area in which you're triggered, that's when you have to be careful about your tone of voice, really. Because that's when there's
maybe you want to do, but maybe you want to do that. Maybe you want to trigger that person off. Maybe you want to get a reaction. I mean, we all do that. We'll say something.
That's the other side of the thing. Now, in that particular situation, something inside of me told me that I should not try to skirt around this issue. And when I first asked the first question, I had no idea there would be any kind of trigger. I thought I was just clearly asking for clarification. I had no idea that it could possibly have the kind of response that it had. But after Steve gave his response, and we sort of left it there, and the meeting went on, later on I realized this is something that had to be said something about. Something inside of me told me that it was important to bring this out in the open. There was something really important there, and that I shouldn't sweep it under the rug. So after that, I wasn't really careful about whether I triggered him or not. I just wanted the thing to be out in the open.
Oh, Jane, you have a good point there of not putting it under the carpet. You have a good point of addressing and taking care of it, and you're actually taking care of it for yourself, because it obviously was bothering you, it was upsetting you, it was something you didn't understand. And a lot of people, as you say, they do this. Oh, it doesn't matter, I'll forget it. And you harbor those things. And I think what you did was amazing. I think you brought it out, you cleared yourself, you cleared the air, and I don't think Steve even knew, that there was a problem there until you brought it up.
But there's a word of caution involved, because if a person does that and their whole goal is to prove that they're right, then there's never going to be a resolution.
Well, no.
My goal was to bring it out in the open, and it caused a big mess, and there was no resolution in that meeting. Both of us were triggered. Neither of us understood what the hell just happened. And I brought it up the next meeting when I had clarity about it, for the purpose of getting to truth. So most people, when they get into a triggered place, then get invested in proving that their universe is right and the other person's universe is wrong. So I could have said, okay, Steve is just a jerk, and he doesn't want people to be clear about things. He likes to, and he thinks people can read his mind.
Okay, so hang up for a minute. So in the meantime, in the middle of all of this, where is our heart?
Well, as soon as I realized what had occurred,
is there a heart involved in this conversation? Where is it?
You can only get to it when you get out of a triggered state. When you're in a triggered state, that means that you're feeling probably fear or something let's describe what we mean by triggered state. It means, my definition is that I use the word limiting decision. Limiting decision is a childhood unconscious decision made usually before the age of 6 or 7. Something along the lines of that you're not good enough, you're stupid, you're bad.
But Jane, that could confuse people even more. So why don't we just simply say, when we react to something, like it is up to me to react. I mean, something happens, you say something, and it's up to me to react or not. If I react, what am I supposed to do? Point a finger at you that it's your fault because I'm reacting? Or do I need to look at something inside of me? Why am I reacting? And what am I reacting to?
Yeah, absolutely. You're right, Steve. And it's, you know what's happening when we do this is that we're not coming from our heart. We're coming from our ego. You know, I had a perfect example of this just a week ago, and it's still very clear in my mind and my partner's mind. It was something so silly, right? We were sitting watching a television program, and there's this actress that came on. And, you know, every time I see her, I realize this now, I say, oh, she looks like that, you know, this well-known British actress. And, you know, Shane said to me, no, it's not. And I said, well, she looks like her. And he said, no, she doesn't. And I said, oh.
I was going to say, then the divorce comes in. Next thing you know, you're blown up.
You know, and walked out of the room. And because we are both sort of aware of this stuff, I sat there for a couple of minutes and I realized what. And, you know, I just went and I said, you know, I apologize. I said, what I'm apologizing for, I'm not apologizing for my reaction because I reacted for a reason. I'm not apologizing for what I felt. And how I felt, actually, was I felt ridiculed. And this is something I felt before, right? So I wasn't apologizing for that, but what I was apologizing for was my response, how I reacted. And because of that, we were able to talk about it. And we able to see that, you know, I reacted in a way, you know, what you said made me feel ridiculed. And of course, he didn't mean to make me feel ridiculed at all. That was the way I responded to it. But, you know, that moment, it was just a spark. And it
that was
a universe that you were living in. So I'd say that's a trigger.
Moments in time. In that moment in time.
And that's why I described about limiting decisions, because you were probably thrown back to a childhood state in which you felt ridiculed, and he was the big adult, and you were the ridiculed child. It was a whole universe, enclosed universe where and that's where heart connection doesn't happen then. to answer
There's
Steve's
no
question.
heart involved in that. It was all my ego. It was all ego, you know. And it's actually being able to, you know, sort of see it for that and bring it back and actually, yeah, you need to analyze. And the first thing you need to analyze is you. It's not the other person. You know, it wasn't Shane that it was me. I said, okay, well, that's interesting. What caused that reaction? And I was
because of your ego. Your ego.
Yeah,
because
I think
of that, you know,
I'm
that
sure every
emotion.
one of us has a story like that. I have one from this morning, you know, and I'll go ahead and tell it. I think if we tell enough stories, the audience will, rather than a big explanation, they'll just get it. Because this morning I go out and I mentioned to my wife that the meeting I had yesterday with Lewis, I said we went to this place. And I was getting at an example of something I wanted to relate about Panama, just a little small story. But she was a little bit more awake than I, and she was enthused. So she goes, oh, you could have tried. And she named 3 restaurants while I'm trying to just get to my story. And then, you know, anyhow, I had a reaction like I raised my voice a little. I'm trying to just tell you a simple little story, you know. and as soon as I did it, I thought, oh man, that was like a little bit of too much of a reaction. Now, both of us could quickly see what had happened. We both didn't let it go any bigger.
So what universe were you in?
So what did you do to stop it? Jim, what did you do to stop making it bigger? Because people don't do that. People don't do that. They get into this argument that goes on and on and on for days.
You know
it escalates usually.
Jane just asked the question. I mean, I was first going to ask Jane and then Nina, and you brought that up. If we realize we're in our universe and that I just had a reaction, I'm closer to understanding what happened rather than me pointing to something outside of me. Like, she did that. No, if I go, I did that, then I'm closer to resolving it, catching it sooner, and not letting it go big. Because definitely 2 people can start setting each other off, just like Jane and Steve or you know, Helen and Shane.
And you notice that when we're in these different universes, it's always about the other person being your enemy.
Yeah, it's always the other person. When you hear yourself saying it's that person, here's my solution. I believe the universe I'm in is my universe. It's the universe I create. It's all my perceptions, interpretations, judgments. And so I just can't point outside of me and blame it because it's not outside of me. It's all inside.
Right, but when you get triggered, it feels like it's outside of you, and that's the whole point: is to realize that that's not
of the mind. Right. Yeah, and the ego, the ego protection. Right.
So isn't it true that when we react, and then the other person's react, or the other person is reacting, so what ends up happening is these forces end up working against each other, and it's really our egos fighting the other person's ego. And when we notice that that's happening, we have a choice. We have a choice to say, I'm noticing that what's happening right now is my ego is in charge. My ego is in control. Do I have the power to stop that? Anybody?
I think it's about...
Go ahead.
So I think it's about noticing what's happening. And, let's not really even not complicate it with ego and trigger and this, but just noticing what's happening in you, how you're feeling, because if you're feeling ridiculed, if you're feeling not listened to, if you're feeling this, that, and the other, that's what you're feeling. And it's about then saying, okay, I'm reacting because of this. It's having that awareness to just stop and feel where it's coming from. And
but this is
looking
where the
inwards first.
The problem comes from if you're feeling ridiculed, most people believe with all their heart that the reason you're feeling ridiculed is because the other person's doing something to you.
Exactly.
Which is
so
never
this
true.
Is the point. No, of course it's not, but this is the point.
This is the turning point.
You have to actually, at that point, that's about taking it inwards rather than outwards. Rather than saying, that person's making me feel ridiculed. Okay, what is it in me that is bringing on these feelings of feeling ridiculed? And that's exactly as you say, Jane, we don't do that. That's on a normal basis, we don't do that.
And you also had the really good insight that this is the feeling that you felt before. Now, people don't sort of put that two together. It is a pattern.
Yeah.
This is not something that's just a one-time thing this person is doing to you. This is something that you feel in a variety of different circumstances because it originates inside of yourself, and that other person has just, you could say, obliged you and brought it to the surface so you can work on it.
Yeah, but Jane, is it real? Is the stuff that's going on, is it real?
I mean, the feeling of ridicule?
Yeah, when we're reacting, we're reacting from the past, aren't we? It's not even real. It's
exactly
not,
right.
We're not being in the present moment.
Hang on,
exactly.
I think you have to define real, because it's very real to you in that moment, right? Anything you feel, any reaction you have to
it's
you,
real. It's real because our mind is recreating it to be real.
Yeah,
right.
so it's about you're feeling it. It's real. Right?
I'd like to say something about that, because I think it has a lot to do with this whole idea of universes. There's a really big difference. People do perceive things differently and have sort of come from a different universe inside of themselves when they're not triggered. It's like my internal universe is different from all the other people in this cast. We view things differently, and different things interest us, and we describe things differently. There's a difference between that and when you're in a different universe because you're triggered. When you're triggered, in other words, this feeling of being ridiculed or made fun of or not taken seriously, whenever something like that comes up, then you can take it for granted that the universe you have now just shifted into is a distortion of reality. It is not representing actual reality. It is a throwback to a time that doesn't exist anymore. And it's really, really important to make the distinction there.
Okay, so Jane, what if I told you that right now you are in a simulated computer program, and none of this is real? Now what?
I wouldn't believe you.
I think
because you're attached to. What are you attached to, Jane? What are you attached to?
Realistic model.
What are you attached to?
I'd really like to just talk, if I may, just say something about this word universe, because for me there is one universe. However, we all have very different levels within that universe. So, it really does depend where we are, in which level we're on, and those levels correspond to our levels of awareness, So it's one universe, but we're just acting within it at a different level. And the more aware you are of yourself and how you show up in the world, of your feelings, of your emotions, and how that is, the more you become aware, and you will react at a different level. So, for example, my reaction a week or so ago took me way back to a level I've experienced in my past. I can still access that level, but in general, I operate on a different level. And I think that's it. There's one universe, and to keep it simple, we just show up at different levels according to our awareness at the time.
And I also think it's, being the bigger person, sometimes we turn around and we look at the situation and we analyze it and we think someone's got to stop this or someone's got to take control. So being the bigger person, which is a big buzzword out there right now, and I think that's, through the economy, when you're secure and you feel secure, you do become that bigger person. When somebody is a little sort of antsy with maybe their work or maybe their lifestyle or whatever the case may be, they're not on that level of being secure. So, and sometimes you say something to them and they attack you or you attack them, but I think it's right. Taking on that bigger person and being that bigger person and sort of going back a little bit, watching the situation. And always be careful with the words you use. Sometimes you've got to think about what is the reaction going to be down the line. And a lot of us don't think of that. We come out with these words and we're not thinking that if I say that, that's going to happen. So I think, being the bigger person and taking responsibility.
Taking responsibility, Nina, really, really important.
And it's not being the ego. It's not being actually the bigger person. It's taking responsibility, but somebody has to take on that. One of the two people. I used to do that with my husband. He used to suddenly row up and everything, and I would just leave the room because I knew that if I stayed there, I'm going to say some things I don't want to say, because you cannot take words back. Once words are spoken, they're spoken. So I think...
Well, that's it. And the only person the only person you're responsible for is you.
Absolutely. And whatever you do in this world, whatever words come out of your mouth, whatever reactions you have is perfectly, absolutely 100% you. So take responsibility of yourself.
Could I ask a question? This is interesting. This is my chance to ask that, but when you say leave the room, now this may or not be true, but I would like y'all to respond. It's just a little detail here. I think women do that leaving the room thing much more. It's like the conversation's over, I'm out of here. Why do you think that is? And why?
I actually experienced more the opposite with my clients. I've just had 2 recent clients where the man leaves the room all the time and it drives the woman completely batty because the woman wants to discuss it and get to the bottom of it.
Well, okay, so maybe my
so is that because there's but Jane, is that because there's a third person around, being the husband and the wife and you?
No.
So he leaves? Of course it is.
No, when it's just the husband and the wife, or the male and the female, the woman wants to discuss what happened, and the man gets to a point where emotionally he can't handle it, so he just leaves.
Because there's 2 women then, he leaves. Typical.
No, it's not 2 women, it's just him and her. They're telling me.
Okay, so maybe there's no pattern. I just thought I'd ask that.
But what is that? What is that? What is that energy?
It's the universe you're in at the time.
Let's just
hang
on, guys. Let's not put that under the carpet. So when we're having a discussion and somebody leaves the discussion, does that mean is that person is just unable to handle the conversation or unable to handle the conflict that's about to occur?
I will answer that because I did it. No, it is not. I left the room for him to actually calm down a little bit because I personally did not want to say things that I regret afterwards. And I knew that if he kept yelling and screaming, I would suddenly say something back that I would regret. So I personally took on the thing that I didn't want to do that. So I left. But I came back, and I came back, started yelling again. And my opinion to him was, I said, listen, just calm down. I said, I will apologize if I think I've done or said something wrong or you misunderstood something. And if it's not, I will not apologize. So I made it very, very clear as to, without arguing, without a high voice like I have right now, I was very clear as what I wanted. And then he said, well, you said this and this and this. And then I was able to explain to him what I meant and how I meant it. And it could have been because of the English terminologies I use, whatever upset him, but we managed to sort it out. And believe it or not, things worked out. And neither one of us actually apologized, but we both understood.
Or maybe that's something to do with tone of voice that we talked about earlier. If you storm out of the room and the message is through your tone of voice and your actions, I'm not interested in pursuing this conversation anymore, that's totally different than if you choose just to take a time out, if you like.
That's what I did.
And to say that whatever is going on right now is not working for me. And I'm going to leave, and then let's both of us cool off, and then we'll come back and see if we can continue.
And if anybody can do that, it's the greatest thing for anybody to try and do if there's a heated argument. Believe me, it really does work, and it comes back because you're adults. Kids don't do that. But
well, you and I have done that before, haven't we? Like, we were on the phone and...
Oh, I've hung up the phone.
You hung up.
You were virtually...
And I go,
I admit that I have, yes, that Steve has aggravated me on something. I've just breathed in and I'm thinking, but I always say, listen, I've got to do something, I'll be right back. Or I've got to do something and I hang up. So I don't like to just slam the phone down because that would be awfully rude.
Or it's hey, guess what? I have another call coming in. I already know what's going on. There is no other call coming in. She's just ready to leave and cool off.
I
had to make an excuse for whatever the situation was. But
okay, so in that circumstance, Nina, did you do that because you were afraid you'd say something you would regret, or because you just couldn't handle it anymore?
No, because I was afraid I would say something I would regret. And that's where I come back into my universe. My universe is I don't want to say things that I can't take back. I do not want to do that. My mother and father did that, and I saw it. So because we're going back to the childhood again, Jane, and you're right. You go back, Helen, you go back to what happens to your circumstances, and you don't want to hit that point. So I don't hit that point, but I always call back, or I will always...
But I wouldn't call that the universe. It wouldn't be what I would describe as the universe that you got into. The universe that you got into is whatever so you were clearly, both of you were we're clearly triggered if the conversation starts getting like that. And so the trigger then, if you can get to what the trigger is, such as I'm not being respected or not being heard or something along those lines, when you get to the heart of what the pain is, like what Helen described as feeling ridiculed, then it's much easier to get an understanding of what the universe that you're living in, a universe in which the other person is your enemy, is not listening to you, not understanding you, not caring about you, or whatever it is. That's a whole internal universe that has nothing to do with reality. It's a triggered place. It's a throwback place. And once you can take the responsibility for it originating inside of yourself rather than the other person, then you're halfway there towards getting the other side of it.
For me, taking responsibility was, let me call you back. You know, I didn't say that, but I said, you know, I've got another call coming. I'll speak to you later, which I did. And I called back, and then we were both calmed down, and then we were able to address whatever did we address it, Steve? I'm sure we did, because we're in good terms.
Oh, we always do. So,
yeah, we always do address it. But if it gets too heated, and don't you feel like that too, Steve? Well, probably not.
If it gets too heated, you know, I think it's about crossing something, and it's like we all have it. We all have a line, and when somebody crosses it, we have to do something. So if you would say something to me that would be really upsetting for me, or you would raise your voice to a point where it's just something that I don't want to be with, I would say, you know what, where we are right now in this conversation is not working for me at all. So let's hang up and let's both of us cool off and come back and continue. That's what I would do. And I think you and I can do that. Now I want to bring...
Yes, we can, absolutely.
Yeah, no, we
We've
can
done
do
it.
No, we can do that more than once. And I think that's great. Now I have this thing that I want to talk about, and that's.
I just want to go back to that at 1 second, what you just said, Steve, to make sure our audience understand that when you do things like that and you actually follow through with calling back and then understanding it, it makes a friendship or a love or whatever it is much, much stronger. Because you're understanding each other far more, you're not ashamed, or you don't feel insecure, or you don't feel above that person, or you don't feel anything. You have that lovely feeling, that beautiful, relaxing, great feeling of, well, we both understood, we both sorted it out, and that is one of the greatest things you can absolutely do, and I would recommend it for anybody out there to do that, because it just makes the relationship and everything that much stronger and grounded.
Well, I think it's when two people, like my interest in with anybody that I deal with is to bring them up, not to bring them down.
Yes.
Now there are times when we get into discussions and conversations and heated conversations, and I had this with Jane as well and others. We somehow get to the point where it becomes uncontrollable, and it becomes uncontrollable when we just go back and forth and our egos are completely in charge. I remind myself that this is more than what I can handle or what I want to handle. Actually, it's too much, and I need to stop. I need to stop for me, not for you, so that because the conversation in those instances get to escalate. Have you noticed that it just keeps escalating?
Well, it just goes on and on and on, then it gets out of the
and then it
goes crazy.
And then it gets crazy and it gets ugly, and we don't need to do that. We don't really need to do that.
That's why we have to be grown up enough, and hopefully we are, that we can actually take control and say, listen, I'll call you back. All right, this is not working for me at the moment. Let me just, go and get a cup of tea, or let me sort myself out and come back as a reasonable person and get this terrible ego out.
Yeah, exactly.
So I want to say something about this, because I think it's a really important thing that will help people be able to do this. When people get into these triggered back and forth things, what they're invested in is being right. Their point of view being right, their way of defining things being right and winning. So the only way you can step out of it without keeping escalating it, and sometimes it can get into violence for people. That's why things become violent, domestic violence is because it keeps escalating and escalating. Because each person is determined to win and to prove that they're right. If you can just be aware of your inner motive to win and be right, and be willing to drop that would be a huge step forward, because there's no winning from that point of view. you are actually giving the other person a lot of power, as if winning over them can somehow solve your life in some way.
And the problem, and you're absolutely right, but the problem is that they get so wound up, and it just doesn't stop. And that's where you don't want to be. Before you get to that place, you've got to take control.
You get caught up in the energy and the drama.
So actually, something just happened recently, and I do want to get to a conversation between me and Jim, because it's an intention that we had for the show. We didn't script any of it, but we did say that we're going to talk about this. But before I get into that, recently, Jane just sent me a letter. And there were specific things that she was concerned about. And there were very good questions. And I could have taken an old way of dealing with it, which I would have reacted to her letter. And that would not have been a good thing. So I just saw the letter for what it was. I saw that I needed to respond to this to really address her questions and do the best I can to explain what's going on from my point of view, and that's what I did. And then the response that I got from her, I mean, the very first thing she acknowledged is, thank you for not reacting to what I asked for. I mean, isn't that beautiful? Isn't that a beautiful thing?
That is beautiful.
And for giving helpful responses. Yeah, I feel moved by it to this moment. I really recognize that was really wonderful that you did that. And it really mattered to me because I was feeling really, really insecure about the issue that I wrote about.
Yeah.
And I really needed support from you. So I was really glad that you didn't attack me, but that you were supporting and helpful.
And I had that option. I noticed that, I could react that way, but you know what? That isn't going to do any good for either one of us.
I have to make a little thing that happened to me just now. Actually, a couple of days ago, I have a tenant, and she's rather erratic. And she wrote me this letter because there was an electricity bill really, really high, so her bill was high, and she was all aggravated about it. And she wrote me a letter explaining how she felt, which was all these big letters and the whole bit, and she was really angry, and maybe you'll get rid of me and everything else. So I happened to go over to the building, and I said to her brother, I said, let me talk to your sister. She has a problem. And she really did not want to talk to me. And I said, no, just tell her to come down. It's okay. So anyway, she comes down, and she's ready to attack me. And I said to her, listen, don't worry about it just yet. Let me just explain to you what I'm going to do, and you will feel better. But this was a woman that actually realized what she was and sent a letter to me because she knew she would actually attack me, really attack me. So she did it through letter form, the same as you, Jane. And it worked because then I got to her, we sorted it all out, and everything's fine. But it's funny how people can do things through letters.
Awesome.
Yeah, sometimes it's better because you're not as emotionally triggered.
All right,
well, yeah, and that's what happened. And the woman's happy, I'm happy, and I just calmed her down. I said, I'm not going to yell at you. I said, I'll make it okay for you, because that's me anyway. But, but she actually recognized what she was, and that's how she did it. So it was a very good way.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that, Ninan. So let's get with this conversation between me and Jim. So here's where I'm coming from when I want to have this conversation with Jim. So the viewers probably have noticed, I'm sure they have, that most of the people, most of the cast, and a lot of the guests as well, although not so much, are women. So there are two men on the show, and that's Jim and myself. So we have an interesting relationship that I want to talk about, because I think this is true for, and I don't want to generalize, but for most men out there. So I actually have a pretty close relationship with every cast member, even outside of the show, when it comes to Living Consciously TV. The relationship that I have with Jim is different. We only interact on the mastermind calls, and we interact on the show. We don't interact with each other outside of Living Consciously TV. So Jim, do you know, from your point of view, why that is?
After the one time we talked by phone, when you invited me to come on the cast, I never heard from you again. And my interpretation of that was, that's a little strange, but I was trying to feel my way around, how this all works. And so I think the way I've handled this is by acceptance and just sort of like trying to get along and understand. And, over the months, I've sort of understood it more to the point that now I realize you and I don't talk very much, which for me in a partnership relationship, or which is a little bit like this cast, how we're all with each other, there's a bonding. I would expect more communication, but I haven't felt prompted to try to get it out of you. And so is it like taken a position of acceptance?
Yeah, Jim, is it like we both waiting on each other to make the first move?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and
well,
what
actually,
is...
you know, Jim, you brought up something earlier today that happened with your wife and you. And you actually stood back and said, well, it was a little bit my fault that I sort of said this thing out there. So you are actually the sort of one that sits back and sort of, I'm not going to say takes responsibility, but takes the blame. So you find it, I think, a little bit difficult to sort of move
responsibility.
Forward.
Yeah, you know, true. That would be a way of, you know, my interpretation of what you just said and how I would make it, you know, sort of describe myself is what we're talking about. And I wanted to bring, I thought of bringing this up, was there's also in our worldview, our universe, everything has expectations as well. So when our expectations aren't met, like, gee, are you going to listen to me? Or gee, are you going to be, you know, a nice person along the lines that I would define? You know, I think I need to accept what is in order to keep my own peace. You know, that I lose my peace if I interact with energy trying to change what's out there.
I think that's a really important insight.
Yeah, so here's the deal. I have partners here in a startup we're working on, and of the four of us, I push a little bit harder because, you know, in this group we're a little bit different. I mean, we develop our ability to do this. So it's almost like what I learned from here. I prod the others to be more forthcoming, but I don't do that with Steve because I guess I accept the role of how it's working. But I think it's cool, Steve, that you just brought this up because obviously you've done a little analysis on this, and I think you've hit something on the head. So I haven't really come up with an answer of why do you think that is, Jim, but I'm trying to explain myself. Well, yeah, I will solve some dissonance, but with acceptance rather than confrontation or engagement.
Or rather than revealing where you really are at. So the dissonance.
True.
So if you're feeling dissonance, then you're probably pissed off in some way.
Well, okay, so let's see. What I have felt sometimes that my judgment is I have been wary of Steve until I got to know Steve better. Maybe I hang back till I think I understand it better. So now just trying to reveal. So, you know, Jim holds back. So now I'll give you more. Go ahead.
I think, Jim, you always hold back because I think this is one of your things. You kind of sit back and you're the type of person that kind of sits back and watches what goes on and then sort of analyzes it all and then comes back in with a little bit. Rather than being, and you might want to try this, is rather than being a little more daring and sort of, you know, go out there and you might be missing an awful lot of in life, maybe you aren't, of not going out there, of not reaching out first. I think you kind of wait for the other person to come in and you go from there. But I think you could reach out more yourself.
Interesting point. Well, or maybe I could have more triggers and impulsively
I can provide those.
Maybe you're describing something of you know, years of work where I've reduced the emotional intensity and I'm not getting triggered.
I think that's it.
Actually listen.
That's exactly
you know?
what it is. You are going to open up and be just be Jim. Just be who you are.
Can you accept that I might be being Jim the way you see me?
Jim is being his authentic self. You know, we all have our different characters, and we all evolve, and we all created a way where we can actually live our lives in inner peace, in peace without conflict. And you know, we do that differently.
Yeah, but I'm hearing two opposite things. I'm hearing you say two opposite things. On the one hand, you're saying that there's some kind of a dissonance there, and you handle it by acceptance. So if you notice there's dissonance there in you, then and you're choosing whether to go to reveal it or to accept it. and you always choose accepting in order to keep your peace. So I'm suggesting something else that you might try in this circumstance in which things can be explored. Out in the world, it's much harder to deal with that, especially if you're feeling uncertain. You may be avoiding being triggered yourself and then causing the kind of thing that I cause with Steve or Steve causes with me. But the thing is that you're really powerful. When you say something that you really think, can sometimes come out rather abrasive, because I think that you're not used to doing it. You're not used to knowing how to bring that further.
May I respond? No, I'm real used to doing it. And because I've noticed that I do it, I try to be considerate and not just blurt things out.
Okay, so I'd like to suggest another step in that.
Okay.
Blurt things out and be abrasive, and then we'll talk about it.
Yeah, well, you may like that. And so in my
No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that there's further steps beyond that. It's not just a matter of repress or be abrasive.
Second here. See, that's the thing. For me, I do develop ideas in my mind of what is the best way to work with another person. I'm hearing you say that, Jane. You know, maybe if you and I want to have that bang, bang, you know, here's what you think, here's what I think, bang, bang, bang. Fine. If I want to do that with you, I could. But if I choose to keep it more moderate and gentle than with a certain person, I'll do that. Now, getting back to Steve and myself, I think if Steve and I lived in the same town, we probably could get through all this in, you know, a single time together where we're the usual, you know, ideas, have a beer together and just talk a little.
For me, that's inaccurate, Jim. I have relationships with all the cast members, and some of them are not even living in the same, you know, they live on a different planet.
I love this.
You don't have to
two universes.
Just pretend you're there.
You told me what I just said was inaccurate.
For
I was trying to
for me, that I'm saying
and
that.
And then I listened to you say that, and I go, "Well, gee, he sure didn't understand how easy it is for me to make sure things could really be understood between two people if we could just get together."
I
so
get
once
that,
again, a good example.
But what I'm noticing that we're going off into a direction that goes to disconnection, and I want to bring us back to connection and to our hearts and to our love, because there's something missing in our relationship. And all I wanted to do is to inquire about and discover maybe what is that's missing.
On my side, I would say, let's say I have this tendency to respond with acceptance as a way of keeping my own peace, and I'm wary of you. I've been I'm cautious with you because I think you've made some decisions that I disagree with. And I feel like you have been lacking in things where you're projecting your ambition, and I see flaws in it, and I don't care to spend the time, you know, getting deeply into it until I think there's enough trust between us. So, you know, that's just my way of responding.
And that's exactly what it is trust.
That's the key word.
You don't trust each other. Steve doesn't trust you, and you don't trust Steve, so you butt up against each other. So rather than either one of you facing it, neither one of you are facing it, because Steve's not calling you, and you're not calling Steve. So it's both of you, not one of you. You're both doing the same thing.
It's not. I think it's the opposite of butting up. You're not.
They're afraid they're going to.
We're choosing not to butt up against each other.
In some respects,
so I'd say there's probably some feeling of hopelessness that's being triggered that you don't, that one or the other of you don't really think there's a way through, or if you really put the whole thing out.
Is it possible that I don't even think about it much?
Exactly. You know, I think sometimes we overcomplicate these things.
Yeah.
You know,
well, do you think I think about it a lot?
Okay, there's a power struggle right now.
My mind. I actually think you don't. Probably.
That's not Jim's issue
But guess what? Guess what?
Wait, Steve. I'm sorry, I might have missed that. Do you think about it a lot?
Yes, he does.
I am now because based on who I am being right now, I might have been a different person a few weeks ago, but who I am being right now, it concerns me, and it concerns me enough to even bring it up in a live show that we didn't even have any discussion about it before. So,
right.
So for some reason, I feel that I feel safe to do this on the show because I know who you are. I know this. I knew the authentic the authentic Jim, and I know the spiritual Jim. I know your greatness, and I'm not sure that I know the other side of you, the dark side of you, which I'm not even sure I want to know.
So I suggest you don't discuss it.
It's like I rather just skip that over.
So what?
I rather just skip. I rather just skip that over.
So you've probably got a dark side too, Steve. So
I know I do. I know
Just
I
don't bring it up.
Give Jim a chance to respond.
I know I do.
Because
Oh,
we're
I'm
just about out of
enjoying.
time.
Well, I respect Steve for bringing this up. I think it's very nice. I think it's part of your growth, Steve, and you're demonstrating your growth. I think that's terrific.
It's
So-
more than that. No, I have to say something here. It is one soul reaching out to another soul, and you are not letting it affect you, Jim.
We're running out of time, guys. I hate
opening
to interrupt you. This is the worst part of my job, but we are running out of time. So what I got to say is, if anybody that has been watching this show, viewing the show right now live, or you're going to be watching it later on from the archives, if anything that we've done on this show have touched, moved, and inspired you, and you asking yourself the question, okay, so now what? Go to our website and sign up in our membership portal, and let us support you, because really that's what we are all about. So go to livingconsciously.tv, and I'm sorry I'm running out of time and I don't have the normal things that I normally say, so we're going to do without those things because it's time to close the show. I love you all, and we're going to be back again next week as usual, same time, same place in our Denver studio, 3 o'clock Mountain Time, and see you then. Again, I love you all.